Hello. In the moment, I'm feeling I don't even know what the word is. Intensely present or something? Blissful? Quiet? There weren't any questions submitted, which is fine. Uh, so I don't have anything in particular to talk about. But it's really nice to uh, not scramble to figure out anything, but in this moment, per se, uh, a talk. Just being in not knowing, and perfectly fine. I remember when I was first really becoming aware of not knowing. It was very uncomfortable. It was scary. It was stressful. It was also kind of deflating to my sense of self because I think as often as humans we do, I was identifying with all my knowings and kind of like almost proud of them, my intellect and my philosophical contemplations and all this different stuff. But it was funny. Well, back when I've been philosophical for much of my life, even before kind of spiritual awakening. But an interesting difference what is earlier, before spiritual awakening, I'd have interesting and deep thoughts, but I'd always end up in a funk. I I think part of it was simply the fact that there's such big questions that can't be answered. That was very frustrating or upsetting to me, to my mind, and leading to these big questions like, what is the purpose of all of this, and the funny thing is I come to realize, and I guess this is why I would kind of fall into a depressive state, was I realized like I don't know. I don't know, and nobody seems to know. And nobody seems to know these big answers. I mean, let alone a lot of people don't even seem to be asking these big questions. But then after a glimpse of awakening, the mind went quiet, and in some ways I tapped into some very far out knowings, you might say. But then in my spiritual journey, it became a lot of uh, embracing silence, especially inner silence, where there's no thinking, like there's no knowings going on in the head. So ironically, at somewhere along the way, um, I had the same realization that I don't know a lot of these answers to big questions, or at least I can't explain them. But I feel a tremendous peace in not in conceptually knowing, which is very different from the suffering I used to experience in not knowing. And it's also been really helpful in practical matters, like a challenge arises, and first thing, I don't know how I'm going to fix it. And there is now a sort of full embracing or welcoming of like, wow, I have no clue what I'm going to do about this. And I almost find that exciting or refreshing. because it's ironic is that even though I have no clue, let's say a practical problem arises today. I was doing some computer work and I run into a lot of different problems, and so the problem shows up, and then, oh, this isn't working. Okay, what can I do differently? And so there's a stepping back from the way I was doing things, and a willingness to look at it, see if I can look at it in a different point of view, a different attempt or such. And then maybe the second and third attempt don't work either. And this the interesting thing with surrender. Each time we try and it doesn't work, it's fine, no problem. In my past, I would have gotten annoyed or impatient or that kind of energy. That is kind of the sound of resistance, of suffering, of some kind of suffering. But instead, it's like, oh, okay, that one didn't work. Something else I find now with acceptance too is there's also a willingness to just put it down. In my earlier past, when I'd come across some challenge or some big situation and I felt like it needed to be dealt with as soon as possible, and so I would do my best to deal with it. The issue is that the solution wouldn't always arise immediately, and my conditioning, though, would work in a way of like, well, let me just keep pushing and sacrificing my own well-being, and then I'll get it done one way or another. And that does work, but it's very aggressive, very forceful, very yang, and it neglects the well-being of the person involved and maybe the well-being of others, depending on how much we push. So now, if a problem arises, I very much enjoy first welcoming this no space, or the not knowing space. Then I dabble into it, try and figure it out. And if, I try a couple of things and it doesn't work, then I put it down. Putting it down also means, obviously, like, okay, let's say I'm on the computer doing work and then I can't figure this thing out. Putting it down would be walking away, physically, removing ourselves from the situation for a moment. But even as importantly, if not more importantly, it's putting it down mentally. So if I go downstairs to make a sandwich, get some water or whatever, as I'm walking down the stairs, I'm not still pondering how am I gonna fix this computer issue, or maybe I should talk to this person, or how the mind just keeps circulating on things. No, this is an important practice, especially when you're dancing with trying to find solutions to problems, is to completely put it down and just be present. So as I'm going down the stairs, I'm just going down the stairs. Right? Kind of like meditative, or a monk walking very slowly down the stairs. My left foot is on the stair, my right foot is on the stair. Granted, you don't necessarily have to say this. If it helps at first, sure. But really, you're just being present in your body in the moment you're doing something. So I'm going down the stairs and then going to the kitchen and making the sandwich or whatnot. And in that moment of just enjoying being present in the very simple tasks, one, I am enjoying those simple moments, but also I'm letting the mind rest, which is a wonderful thing for us to practice. Though the mind is a powerful tool, like many powerful tools, if you just have them running 24/7, it's going to get burnt out, or it's going to get overloaded or whatnot. And this is true for our mind too. And it's also important reason to put down that deep striving for answers as soon as possible kind of energy, to put that down, surrendering and being okay with not knowing. And then you could say switching the knowing into a more direct knowing, like just knowing that I'm walking down the stairs, or knowing that I'm making a sandwich, or knowing that I'm drinking my water. I'll do that right now to show you what it looks like. So you don't have to like drink extra slowly. But in the moment that I was drinking, I was just experiencing the drink. I wasn't thinking about even being here on the recording or anything. Right? So just direct action, direct practice. But so when we know and we kind of embrace this lovely presence knowing, you might call it, and then I come back upstairs and sit down and look at the computer again. And maybe I decided to step back into the problem to see if I can figure it out again. And this I often find is where inspiration will pop in too. Like, oh, let me message so-and-so. They might have an answer. Or oh, I didn't. Well, I could try it this way, and then I try it, and oh, it works. Great. Problem solved. Now, the whole time, not only is the problem getting solved, but what you could say is actually more important than us solving all these problems that arise in our daily life. What's more important is our state of consciousness. Eckhart uses this term a lot. And so then the question is, well, what is our state of consciousness? What is that? And this is two areas where I find it's helpful to look closely at to help determine what is your current state of consciousness. Because it doesn't mean like what's your state of consciousness been like, throughout your morning. That's in the past. Nor is it about how's it going to be in the future. It's specifically right now, this moment, what is my state of consciousness? And so then we look closely on the two levels that I often talk about. The feeling level, how am I feeling? And then also the mental level, are there any thoughts happening? Is the mind wandering around, rambling around, talking, daydreaming, imagination, right? Is the mind busy? And is the body experiencing any form of resistance or suffering? So this is our state of consciousness. Is most important. And, like I mentioned earlier, though, what is very strong in the world right now, in the human world, is, I'll say, I have a task to get done. And what we've been really deeply conditioned into is, I'm going to get this task done, and I don't care what it takes. Even if I'm stressed, anxious, angry, whatever, emotions, busy mind, that doesn't matter. What matters is that the task gets done. And unfortunately, that is not true. Because, yeah, you can get the task done. I've gotten many tasks done that way. But when we neglect our inner state as primary, it creates a lot of problems. One, we're suffering, which in and of itself is enough to acknowledge. But two, the quality of our work also arises from our inner state. So if we're in an anxious, stressful state, the quality of our work will reflect that. So the quality goes down. And then there's also a very kind of far out view of how manifestation works. So, manifesting, right, is kind of putting out into the universe what we want or so on. I want a new car, and then I put it on my dream board and I do affirmations and eventually I get the new car. It's one kind of manifesting. But as we are consciousness, we're actually manifesting whether we realize it or not. The whole outer realm world is a byproduct of it being manifested by consciousness, which includes all of us. You could say this world is like a collective project in the manifesting. We're all adding in our little bit to it being as it is, which on some levels, Earth is quite beautiful, animals are awesome, but on other levels, quite crazy. Yeah, the news and everything, a lot of insanity in the human world. And this is a byproduct of our consciousness, our state of conscious. Not just you and me, but all humans. And with so many humans completely neglecting this inner state, this is how you end up with a crazy human world. So, now, what's interesting too is, I think often we have some kind of a pull or desire to help change the world when we see the craziness out there. And it might not look like our end of things is that big of a deal. Getting a little stressed while working, or getting lost in thought while going down the stairs, or whatever, right? All these little bits where we lose our presence and practice. But it is actually more powerful and more important than we realize. Not only in how our individual life manifests, but also in the collective consciousness. Something I've come to realize over the years, it's very easy to underestimate just how important our own state is, because it seems small, so tiny, benign, compared to the big picture. But what so many spiritual teachers are telling us, and what we come to realize, is we are part of that big picture, more so than we've ever realized. And this is where, when I hear a lot of people worrying about the state of the world and how can we help and all that stuff, like, one of my main answers is, well, I'm going to be the change I wish to see. Truly. I'm not going to, well, for one, I'm not going to drive around with, weapons and all the really crazy stuff you see in the news, obviously. But I'll take it even further and drive around in a genuine state of peace and equanimity, rather than stress and rushing, urgency, impatience, anger, right? All the lower levels of consciousness. Or if I'm working, to really take care of and protect my inner space, tend to the inner garden, as Eckhart calls it. And this is what helps heal the outer world and the inner world, of course, but also the outer world. But what's fascinating about this too, that I found in my own individual experience, is the more I integrate spiritual awakening, or as you might say, the more I live in presence, the more I call out and dissolve the ego, or work with my reactivity and find more mastery and peace and so on, the more I do all this spiritual practice and such, over the years, my life in general has become much more harmonious. I don't really, if I think about right now, I don't really have an enemy in my life anymore. I did for many years. I had at least one big enemy. But no, nobody that I'm really bumping heads with. But more than that, it's just like all the dramas have calmed down. when a problem arises through practice, through surrender, and through maintaining the inner peace, I'll either have an immediate knowing of what to do to solve the problem, or the problem will just kind of magically fix itself. That happens a lot. It's pretty nice. You might call it miracles. Problem will just kind of resolve itself. So that's why, too, it might seem so trivial that while we're working and then we're getting stressed, to kind of just ignore that stress and, do the work. And also not to mention that the idea of stress and anxiety is so normal that we don't even realize, oh, maybe this doesn't belong. Just because everybody else around us is stressed, right, doesn't necessarily mean we're supposed to be stressed. But then if you also take into account how our state of consciousness manifests our future, that's even more of a reason to be extra vigilant for our stress and our anxieties and our fears and our negative judgments of others and all this different negative stuff. Because, well, here's the interesting thing is you can choose to ignore all of that stuff, but your reality is still going to manifest from that. So it's going to reflect a lot of that kind of frequency. So that's why you could say there is no stress or anxiousness or whatever that's truly justified in a way of like, oh, that can stay. That one's not a big deal. That one's just because of, X, Y, and Z. No. Now, granted, we have to work with our sufferings. We can't suppress them or ignore them or bypass them. That's not the way either. But this is where, as you're protecting, you're caring for your inner state, or another nice term Eckhart calls, be the ever alert guardian of your inner space. So as we're doing that, being this inner guardian, like a soldier at the guarding the gates, right? Vigilant, aware. Or is your soldier sleeping? And then intruders sneak in. Right? Wake up your guards. Be present. And so being the ever alert guardian of our inner space, though, whatever shows up inside of us, if anxiety, stress, anger, impatience, annoyance because of difficult humans or whatever, the world is very messy and loud and complicated and potentially triggering. And this is why a lot of my work also puts attention on notice where the world is pulling you in, or where it's lowering your state of consciousness. And that's not a bad thing, but you have to look at that and work with it and then learn to heal it and to kind of deepen, or maybe strengthen is a good word. So that way the world isn't able to blow out the flame, the light of consciousness, the light of the world, that wakes up in us. And then when we're present, it's like, you're a light in the world. And then the world is very windy and stormy at times, difficult, blows out the light. Then you got to come back, relight yourself. Use that reignition button. Which you could call spiritual teachings, really. When our light goes out, our light gets dimmed, we come running back to spiritual teachings for help. And then we kind of settle back in, and we're good. And then we think we got it, Then we go back off on our own and we forget the teachings. Uh, and then the world blows out the fire again, and we run back to the teachings until we finally learn to stay in the teachings, you might say, to live in them as best we can. But so again, this very important question: what's my state of consciousness right now? I ask myself, you can ask yourself, and just listen. It's very important to be deeply honest, because awareness is simply honesty. It just sees what is. Then there's no judgment, there's no filters or colors of coloring the images. It's just seeing what is. And it's funny because earlier today I've been helping with this big project with the Eckhart teachings. They're moving websites, and I'm helping move the courses to the new website. And today I was working on this really big, I guess you call it, file called Living Free from Stress and Anxiety. But for whatever reason, this particular one has been very complicated. There's, to give you an idea, one of the modules has over 100 little videos. And normally they have like 6 or 7, but this one got cut up into very small pieces for some reason. But as I was doing it, I was catching this sense of urgency, and then I realized, like, oh, I feel stressed right now, and anxious. And I'm like, it's kind of missed it, and it's like, how paradoxical, Not only am I very familiar with these teachings and the practices, but I'm also helping organize and put together this teaching on becoming free of stress and anxiety, and it was creating stress and anxiety in me. Fascinating. But the real point here is you can never put your guard down in that sense. You have to always be ever alert. And so when I noticed, I'm feeling, I laughed because I was like, I'm feeling stressed right now. That's ironic. So then I put it down. I stepped away. There was another time, though, that I was feeling this anxious energy, and instead of stepping away, I just surrendered to it. I was just like, because a lot needs to get done. There's a time sensitivity and pressure. So the other side is actually just to surrender to that pressure. And what's funny was when I deeply surrendered to it, it went from like a heavy uncomfortableness, and then it turned into this like profoundly blissful feeling. And then I was just continuing to click and type, but now I'm thoroughly enjoying myself again. So that's like an example where state of consciousness very just quietly started going down before I realized it, until all of a sudden I guess a little alarm in me goes, oh, wait, you've lost the piece. And then, okay, so I can either step away or I can surrender. And either way, we have to, what's really important in these moments where we realize we've lost it, or this ship is sinking. Oh no, water's getting in, it's really important to, as soon as you notice that, to take care of it. So that's what I did, and then you can go back up. And yeah, it's interesting how you could almost say creative life is with these challenges or tests. Really, I see them as lessons, though, too. Like everything is a lesson. I've also found, though, in life and learning a lot of these lessons, that it just seems like the overall teacher of life also has a sense of humor. And it's great to laugh with. Another, just a small note on the powerful practice of not knowing, is it's especially wonderful when you're interacting with another person and they have some kind of action that you're not sure why they did whatever they did. This is where the mind has a tendency to want to guess. And, oh, I think they did that because of, this other thing. And then that's connected to this other thing. And, right, the mind will just spiral into all these sort of what if ideas and possibilities of why someone did what they did. And I've actually found it much more freeing to not go into all of that, and instead to just acknowledge their choice, honor it, okay, acceptance, honoring the choice, and holding the space if they decide to explain why. Well, great, okay, then you listen to why. And if they don't, well, that's fine too. I don't need to know why. If they don't feel the need to explain, I don't need to ask. No, maybe sometimes, occasionally, there's exceptions, but yeah, I've that's something I've noticed over the years in interacting with people. Because when we're interacting with people, we're also inevitably interacting with minds, right? Unless you happen to be interacting with somebody who's enlightened, who has a very subtle or even almost completely absent busy mind. That's still kind of rare, right? So most people we interact with is going to have some level of busy mind. And it kind of becomes contagious or sticky when we're doing our best to be in presence and to be out of the busy mind, and then someone in their ego has a reaction, and then they act out of it, and then we try to guess why or how or what they were coming from. We're trying to guess in that field of the ego, and very contagious, because next thing you know, we have 4 different ideas of why, and some of them they're categorized as more and more personal or something, but and so it kind of just draws you in, right? Just one of the examples of how someone else's mind can draw you into your own mind. Next thing you know, you're caught up and lost in dramas. And then what's really funny, though, is if you can ever catch that this happens, and then you catch it, though, and then you can actually ask the person, hey, what was your reason, if you don't mind me asking? And then they tell you. And then it's great when you've learned that you were wrong. Oh, wow, my mind made up a whole different story. How crazy. And just, laugh at that and let it go. But this is where I really, another reason why I love the space of not knowing and not needing to know. Because if I'm in the space of not knowing and not needing to know, and then there's peace, and people have freedom to do whatever, however their actions flow out of them, and if they wish to explain it, okay, sure, and if they don't, okay, I don't need to know. Kind of reminds me of forgiveness too. Like, at some point, I don't exactly know when, but there was a shift in me where I realized, oh, I don't need people to apologize anymore. It really doesn't make much of a difference to me if someone apologizes, for me anyway. It is nice to see when someone apologizes for their sake, because they're becoming aware, and they're just taking responsibility, owning up to it, and then hopefully forgiving themselves and just moving forward. And then, okay, lesson learned, no problem, right? But from my own side, my own peace is never waiting for someone to apologize. which I think is quite important because you don't not going to always get an apology, especially if someone has a fairly strong ego. Ego does not like apologizing. It does not like admitting when it's wrong. But in this space, like a deep space of forgiveness, I've mentioned in previous videos about like no one can act beyond their level of consciousness, which also comes back to that what I was mentioning earlier. Our state of consciousness is primary. When you care for your state of consciousness, it naturally is going to start elevating. Maybe not immediately. Tonight you're going to go from here to enlightened. It's possible, but more than likely it's going to go, lots of this. But then gradually it starts to go up higher and not as down low. And then you're just making progress like that. But the fact that we can even entertain this view and start doing this inner work means we're well on our way in awakening. There's a lot of humans that are completely oblivious to this inner state of consciousness, to their inner space, to how they're feeling, to the busy chaoticness of their mind, and so on. Completely oblivious to it. And that is a state of unconsciousness. And that unconsciousness operates in a lot of insanity, and it might have all kinds of great ideals and virtues and beliefs, but their actions are quite the opposite. Unconscious, selfish, narcissistic, violent. And that paradox is because of ego. But this is where I feel forgiveness naturally. Anyone that I would need, I would need to forgive, or that I would maybe in the past want their apology, they must be operating in some lower level of consciousness, because the higher levels of consciousness don't make such foolishness, such mistakes, such actions out of reactivity or so on. So once you get to the higher states, there isn't a lot to apologize for because you're living in a very skillful way. But if you make a mistake, you can still acknowledge it and work with it, but they just become more rare, right? But in the lower states, with all that ego and blind spots and I identify as being a nice, kind person, and then, I'm flicking off this person because they're driving too slow. That paradox of the ego. I recognize that. I've been in it myself. I get it. It's very easy to fall into, and we're kind of born into this ego stuff, and it's not easy to get out of. And I recognized that in my past, and now I'm also grateful that I'm out of it to a large degree. And that is where my forgiveness happens. Anyone that would maybe require me to forgive, I just see that, they're still caught up in all of this. So much, so busy mind, and personalness, and self-image, and identifications with the body and the mind stuff, and and just getting taken over by reactions constantly, reacting. They have no control over any of it. They're just really caught up and lost in this. And so when I see this, it's just like sort of like, okay, I get it. And so there's like a forgiving there. No one can act beyond their level of consciousness. So if I'm up here enjoying these higher states, and someone's down here creating havoc and chaos, and sometimes they come at me, they throw a rock at me or something. Metaphorically, energetically, gratefully, no one's actually throwing rocks at me. But then I just see it as like, well, they can't do otherwise. That's just where they're at right now, and that's okay. And then there's also a hope or a wish, like compassion, like, I certainly hope they get out of that soon, because that's not pleasant. But of course, this isn't all happening in thought either. That's the interesting thing about this type of forgiveness. It's just a sort of a knowing, a silent knowing, an integrated wisdom or knowing Another interesting, important note here: if you're at a higher state of consciousness, and then there's the ego, the varying levels of ego. We're using the high and low scale just for an idea of comparison to the states of consciousness, but the beings are still equal. Ironically, though, the beings in the high states know that we're all equal, and the beings in the low states are getting all caught up in, I want to be superior, and all the fluctuation of the ego. But freedom of the ego, where technically, spiritually, they are at a much higher level of freedom and mastery and so on, and living in sanity rather than insanity, they get, we're actually all equal. So it's a funny paradox there. But yeah, so this understanding that no one can act beyond their level of consciousness, it kind of creates an instant forgiveness. There isn't even, there isn't like someone does a thing and then, oh, I get angry and then, oh yeah, I need to forgive. And then how do I forgive again? And then, all this process. It's just like someone does a thing. And if I'm truly in that knowing about no one can act beyond their level, then it doesn't even bother me when it first comes at me. It doesn't catch on to anything, which is good. But if it does catch on to something, then I look at that, what in me got caught up, got pulled into their mind drama, into their ego? What part of my ego or ego fragment was still lingering enough to get caught up in that? And then I work and you heal that and you dissolve it. And then, it comes back to the other point about becoming a more I want to say immovable light. Right, the world and its chaos and busyness, and the people with the egos, and they're all doing their dance, but you can maintain equanimity, the transcendent space, being in the world, but not of the world. Freedom. Ironically, one of those talks that I was talking about with Eckhart from the freedom from stress and anxiety, one of the titles is Freedom from the World. The world of form, which is beautiful and interesting and at times pleasurable and memorable and exciting and all these kind of positive qualities, but then also difficult, upsetting, challenging, scary, infuriating, all kinds of stuff on the form level. Now, to be free of the form world, though, is not to disassociate completely. I mean, I guess you could if you were able. You could just you could just go move onto the mountains and live in a little cabin. It's like the American version of in India, just living in a cave. But that wouldn't quite be transcending the world as it is, because it would be kind of transcending the world as we make it to be, which is still might be something. A hermit can still be good for the frequency holding. But if you find you're probably not going to do that hermit lifestyle, then you have the more integrated human journey to go through, dealing with other people, traffic, bills, all this stuff, taxes, government stuff, relationships. Which turns out all great for practice, great for deepening. world of form. But part of the freedom of from world of form is just not finding our identity out here. Because all of this out here in form is also impermanent. So if we identify with any of it, we set ourselves up for inevitable issues in the future. Identify with something that's going to end, it's not going to end well. Which sounds obvious when you say that like this, but yeah, so to find freedom from the impermanent world is to look deeply within and to see if is there something in me, of me, that is not of form world. Now, a tricky part here is you ask this question, and the mind knows the right answer. The mind says, oh, yes, my soul, or whatever, you know. And the interesting, tricky thing about this is that the mind is actually another layer of form. It's a more subtle layer of form, but it's actually still form. So this is why thoughts about being, a point of presence, a being of consciousness, the I am, that I am, all these kind of spiritual thought answers, though they mean well and are in the right direction, the thoughts themselves will not satisfy or offer true transcendence, because they too are of form. They too are of the impermanent realm of form. But you can still invite the contemplation, the inquiry. But the realizing of our formless nature, well, I could say that's what spiritual awakening is, realizing your formless nature. Which, it's a realization, though, that's even beyond the mind. It's beyond thinking. It's a in this moment realization. Oh, your presence. You become aware of your own presence. Oh, very hard to point at. Or being is another lovely word for our formless nature. So if we know ourselves deeply as being, not just conceptually, but we feel it, then there's much peace, stillness. Then we know, and when you feel this spaciousness, that sense of freedom, when you feel that, then you know you have the right answer. Eckhart calls it feeling realization. So it's not thought realization, it's feeling realization. It's, oh. A nice thing to know in this, ironically, is that you really don't need to know much. Like, if you listen to a spiritual teacher, they seem like they know a lot. They know all kinds of stuff and they answer all kinds of questions. But to be in the thing that they're really trying to point at, which is what they themselves are living in and speaking from, this space does come back to the space of not knowing anything. The mind subsides. And what's left when the mind subsides? Who am I when the thoughts dissipate? And so you can really tap into this lovely freedom and not have much knowledge about all this far out spiritual stuff. You might not know how to teach it or answer questions or tap into the mysteries. And you don't need to. The most important thing is to just be. Because a lot of the spiritual teaching, deep, interesting, fascinating stuff can actually be traps along the way too. Like, I think of it sometimes as spider web, very sticky. The mind pulls you back in under the disguise of spiritual forms. But if you can go into the space of, no, I don't need to know. I don't even need to know what it's called. It doesn't matter. I just know what I'm feeling. I know the feeling is happening. Ah. I have some air filters. It's time for me to change the air filters and the air conditioning here at the house. Reminder for you in case you're one of the many that forget. But I bring it up because the box says, breathe simply. Ah, yeah, breathe simply. As I was going through some of these courses, I actually happened to come across both of the Q&As where I had asked Eckhart a question. It was nice to re-listen to them. One of the things that stuck out to me from the second one was I asked him about blind spots. I told him I felt like I was making good progress, but I wanted to make sure to kind of keep my ego in check, or keep myself in check. And, if he had any advice on how to catch blind spots in case I had any pockets of ego I wasn't seeing. And he gave different good advice. One of the things that really stuck out to me, though, was his very simple and effective definition of the ego as conceptual identities. There's many ways to define the ego. It's a very rascally, tricky thing to fully grasp and dissolve. But that's a very potent one. Conceptual identities. who do we identify as? What concepts do we add to ourselves? On the form level, some people are very identified with their gender or with their race, their skin color, or their cultural upbringing. So all this form stuff that's connected to the body. People even get identified with sports teams. Oh, I'm an Eagles fan, or whatever. You can be an Eagles fan just like you can be in a male body and have some slight identification with it. But to derive your full sense of self in any kind of form, whether it's that I'm a guy or that I'm an Eagles fan, which I'm not, but just example. I don't really follow football much. But it's this very subtle, very delicate movement where the I gets caught up in these conceptual ideas of who it is, of who I am. And there's going to be so many of them. Of course, a big one right now and for many people is political, our political identities. But really, these are all just different clouds of thought that are happening. And the I says, oh, I like this cloud. Okay, I'm going to be in this cloud. And then I don't like that cloud. That cloud's a bad cloud. And the polarization strengthens the ego. But really, the reason that it's ego in the first place is because the I isn't meant for either of those clouds. Though Ram Dass put it nicely too, that I forgot his exact quote, but something like you can transcend the world of form, but you still have to remember your name and address. You still got to go on about your day, and so we honor our forms, we appreciate them, we don't completely disassociate from them, but we hold them gently, and while knowing on a deeper level who we really are. And it's almost like our body and all this form stuff is like clothing. I know I'm not this shirt. I take the shirt off and I wash it later, That's kind of how I feel about the body. I mean, I very much appreciate the body, but it's a temporary loan, this body and all, and the mind and the thoughts and the conditionings. But who is learning the body, if we're going to keep going with that metaphor? The energy of life itself, the experiencer, that which within us is experiencing this world. That's our presence. That's the part of us that is formless, is free of the world. Because the body can die, all these different things could disappear, but the presence remains. Because it doesn't need the body to exist. Oh, that is a similar idea. I've heard Eckhart say that thought needs consciousness to exist, but consciousness does not need thought to exist. But it also turns out that knowing our presence, identifying as our presence deeply, not conceptually, not walking around thinking to myself, I'm presence, I am life, I am that I am. I'm not walking around thinking these things. Those would just be thoughts. There's the silent emanating just being of being present. Being present is connection to presence. And in that, it's very pleasant. If it wasn't so pleasant, I don't think we'd call it freedom or enlightenment or liberation. That's why they have these lovely names, because it's a lovely experience. And the last thing I'll end on that is beautiful to acknowledge too, whether you live in it consistently or you glimpse it every now and then, it's really nice to recognize that every single person has this connection to presence inside them, or a living energy in them. The less they are aware of it, the more unconscious, the more there's ego. The more they are aware of it, the more we are aware of it, the more there is freedom and peace and sanity in our actions and in our inner state. And in a way, it's like none of it's personal on either end. It's an interesting thought too, but being grateful for our knowing of it. And one of the best ways to shed gratitude, shed isn't the right word, shed light on gratitude, I guess you could say. But one of the best ways to honor appreciation is to keep coming back to it. I heard somewhere a long time ago, and it stuck with me. Someone was contemplating, like, what's the most optimal way that I can honor God? They had a very strong devotion toward God, toward the divine, toward the spiritual world. And they wanted to, like, praise or shed thanks and gratitude, as best they could. What's the most optimal way? What is the way God would prefer? And I forget who said this, but someone said, being in presence, in communion with God, is the highest form of praise. And it pushed against my conditioning of my past of, like, praising the divine was in gospels and singing and studying, reading, and talking about all this stuff and thinking about it and saying thank you and thank you and thank you, saying all these words. But no, actually, there's an even deeper way to show deep gratitude, and that's by joining in the presence, which the more I see it years later, it makes a lot more sense. But